Gravity Falls is a very queer show, and I'm not just talking about the weird stuff going on in the town. Hello all you beautiful people, I'm Mizzz Sally Pryde, this with 3 Z's and Y, because why not? This video should be coming out August 31st, 2023. Dipper and Mabel's 24th birthday. Don't you feel a little old now? And I'm going to be structuring this similar to how I did the Spider-Man video a few months back. I'm going to be ranking each episode as well in a tier ranking, while also talking about the trans themes in each episode. When we're done talking about season 1, we'll have a brief intermission where I'll talk about Gravity Falls shorts for my patrons. We'll also talk about who I think is trans and why. So without further ado, let's get started. The story of Gravity Falls follows Dipper Pines and Mabel Pines as they go up for the summer to see their great uncle Stan and work at his Mystery Shack, a tourist attraction. In this episode, we get established to most of the characters that we'll be seeing throughout the series. Now, I don't have many notes on this episode. I think it's a pretty good episode. It's a great way to start off the series, but the main thing I want to talk about here, and I think it's a good start for talking about queerness, is the fact that the journals that Dipper finds in the woods say, "Don't trust anyone." And by the end of the episode, he learns to trust his sister. The idea of don't trust anyone and then Dipper learning to trust his sister is a good indication of things to come here. When you think about queerness, almost every person who's queer has to come out. And coming out is about trust first and foremost. It's showing trust in someone else. Given that we're in a homophobic and transphobic society, we often feel like we can't come out to anyone. And we can't trust anyone. Learning to trust others because they can have your back. How do I rank this episode? I think it's a great start, but I think there are ways it could do better, so B tier. There's nothing queer to discuss here, but decent story. Not as good as the first episode, so I'll give it a C tier. This is the one where the wax figures come alive, and there's the introduction of the llama sweater, which we'll see again in the finale. Again, nothing really queer other than the fact that now we're finally starting to see Dipper's insecurity around his masculinity. A lot of guys are insecure, especially at that age, about their masculinity. This has led to a lot of people thinking that Dipper is trans, and I think that is totally understandable here. Dipper getting misgender gets him really upset, much more than a cis guy would.
Listen, little girl! Hey, actually,
There's a running theme throughout this first season of Stan not knowing that there's queer stuff going on here, if you know what I'm trying to say. And he says it's all part of their imagination. Where have I heard that before? How do I think about this episode? I think it's about on tier with the first episode, so I'm gonna put that in the B tier. This is the episode where we're introduced to Gideon, and this is gonna sound a little controversial here, but Gideon represents religion. Not only the fact that Gideon is a biblical name, but we see Gideon's show, it's basically a religious service going on. He's able to predict stuff, and people are having religious experiences as a result. And Gideon decides to invite Mabel to his dressing room, which, holy sh*, has a very creepy undertone, and it's also like foreshadowing for what's to come. The difference between Dipper and Gideon is that Dipper tends to be more easily upset when he's called a girl, whereas opposed to Gideon isn't. And that says a lot about Dipper as a character, and I think why a lot of people see Dipper as a trans guy. Trans people, we're trying to be respected almost constantly for who we are, and it's not the same for cis people, that they can more easily brush it off. There's a difference between being offended and being disrespected. If you're deliberately misgendering someone, that is an act of disrespect. We're not offended when you do that. You're just disrespecting us. You're denying who we are as human beings and our lived personal experience. Even if someone hasn't transitioned yet, they are still the gender they say they are. Even before I transitioned, I was still female. I was born female. The doctors just got it wrong. Before transitioning, I felt like masculinity and manhood were this costume I was putting on, that I was not allowed to be feminine due to transphobia. And also sexism. We have the lived experience through it, even if we haven't transitioned yet. And seriously, if you're a guy, how would you feel if I kept calling you ma'am, despite you telling me otherwise? It's not a difference of opinion, it's who we are as people. Why do you get to question my gender, and I don't get to question yours? And there are a few telling lines here that Gideon says that really sort of paint a picture of masculinity and the role men have in society over women. That people have a hard time saying no to Gideon. where have I heard that idea before? Throughout this series, a lot of Mabel's arcs are based on romance. And to be clear, that is a normal part of a lot of teen girls' experiences. But I think it's a bit of an issue when it comes to how the male and the female characters are portrayed on this show. The male characters have these different arcs, whereas almost all the female characters are defined by some sort of romantic arc in some way. Now, the creators of the show wanted gay characters on the show, but Disney would not allow them to do that, as they feared it would alienate a large portion of their base. Oh, how times have changed. Since only heterosexuality is allowed, that inherently means that romantic arcs are defined by heterosexuality. And I know there is one exception to this rule, and we'll get to it when we get to it. But it's a big problem throughout the show that when it comes to the men, they have these really expensive arcs, and it goes into a whole lot of depth as to what a man is supposed to be in society. But when it comes to the women on the show, their arcs, more often than not, revolve around romances, and I think that's a problem. They end up taking Gideon's necklace, which gave him his powers. But trust me, he has other plans up his sleeve, and Gideon gets very upset at the idea that Mabel will never want to date him. A lot of guys on this show feel entitled to women, so yikes. And at the end of this episode, we learn that Gideon has journal number 2, and it's still at large who has journal number 1. So where does this episode rank? I think it's a great episode, and actually a little bit better than the first episode, so I'm going to give it A tier. Simply because Gideon's such an enjoyable character to watch. Wendy is an older girl who works at the Mystery Shack, and Dipper has a crush on her. He lies to her about his age, saying he's 13 when he's actually 12, so that he can hang out with their teen crew. And let me just say this, Wendy is giving off amazing Futch energy, and I love that. Seriously, if you don't know what the Futch scale is, look it up. And Mabel reveals that Dipper used to do something called the lamb dance and dress up like a lamb, and it's super embarrassing. Even though I think most people at that age would be embarrassed by that, I think it adds an extra layer there when you think about Dipper as a trans guy. Dipper being seen as this masculine man and his desire to do so compared to the other boys around him. Now, we're introduced to Robbie, and I think Robbie is a trans guy, and we'll talk about that in the intermission. The B plot of this episode is Stan watching an old rom-com, and well, at first he's like, I don't want to watch this, and screaming, but he doesn't want to get up from his seat to go change the channel, and he gets really invested in it, and he's breaking gender norms. At one point, he's shown to have gotten up to get ice cream, so he could have changed the channel all along, but he ended up just getting some ice cream instead.
Watching the black and white period piece Old Lady Boring Movie channel.
Kids! I can't find the remote and I refuse to stand up!
Stay tuned for the Friday night movie, The Duchess Approved, starring Sterling Stembleburgess as the Duchess, and Crampton St. Rumterfrabble as the irascible coxswain Saunterblug and Hamterfuppenshire.
Kids! No! No!
About dukes or commoners or His Royal Highness Lionel of Cornwall, I'm not afraid anymore, Mother.
Duchess, I forbid you.
I may be a duchess, but I'm also a woman!
Yes! Yes! In your face, Elizabeth! It's just like my life! In a way.
This convenience store is haunted, and they end up getting tortured and stuff like that. But Dipper ends up saving the day when he reveals he's actually 12 and does the lammy dance. And the store owners who haunt the store even call it girly dancing, which, if that's not a reason Dipper is upset as a trans guy, I don't know what would. And as a result, Dipper is seen as more mature for how he handled the situation. And it turns out what killed these store owners was rap music, because they didn't like young people, which... Hold on. Are you sure that's not just racism? When most people complain about rap music, it's usually a race-based thing? I think one of the problems with this show is that the men on this show are free to break gender norms, but the women are more reserved in their gender roles. Where would I put this one? I think it's on similar level with the pilot and the wax figure episode, so B tier. Dipper versus manliness. As a trans woman, I actually don't have much to say about manhood. What? I'm not a man. What do you expect? I'm not gonna lecture you about manhood. I know what men do, but I don't understand why they do it, because, you know, I'm not a man. Dipper goes to a diner and he feels upstaged by his lack of strength. And seeing this through a trans male lens, that sort of puts the picture there. And this episode really revolves around what does it mean to be a man? And no, it doesn't mean having a penis or XY chromosomes. Stan in this episode talks about hiding your feelings deep down, which is not good for anyone, regardless of your gender. I know there's this pressure put on men to do that, but it's really not good for your mental health. The cops taking their shirt off, which I think it's the first homoerotic moment in this show, but it's still portrayed as a masculine moment because guess what? Gay men can still be masculine. And there's the infamous mailman joke.
Sorry, I was looking for the mailman.
Oh, what? Are you saying I'm not a male man? Is that what you're trying to say? I'm not male? I'm not a man? Is that what you're getting at?
Are you crying?
If you're a trans guy, let me know down in the comments what you think of that. The B plot of this episode has to do with the fact that Stan has a crush on Lazy Susan, the woman who runs the diner. And Mabel does a makeover of Stan and to help boost his confidence so he can ask her out. And in the process, Soos gets cross-dressed to do this, to be Lazy Susan as practice. Which is interesting when you think about this as an episode about masculinity, that Soos throughout the series is shown to have cross-dressed. And I think that's important when talking about masculinity, that you can still be a man and cross-dress. Soos is secure enough in his masculinity to do that. And Dipper meets the Manitars who train him in the ways of manhood. But in the end, it doesn't really matter because they ask him to kill a three-headed bear, and he decides, I'm not going to do that, which is seen as masculine. When I first saw this episode, I was still an egg. And, well, it didn't really seem much to apply to me, because I didn't really have any aspirational interest in manhood. My aspirational interest was more in womanhood. But as you could probably have guessed that, I wanted to be more like Mabel and less like Dipper. 11 years later, I'm Mabel, bitch. Dipper is made fun of because he listens to an ABBA parody called Baba, which, hello, I'm an ABBA queen, I'm the dancing queen. Dipper gets his first chest hair. For some reason, I never grew chest hair, which I'm extremely grateful for. Not sure where I got that genetics from, but whatever. Now, I don't know how good of a message this is for men, as I am not a man myself. Other than, you know, violence is bad, that sort of stuff, I want to hear from you. Men, if you're a man watching this, let me know down in the comments what you think of that episode. Especially, I want to hear from trans men. How do you relate to your masculinity? Because that's really something I don't have a relationship with as much. I think it's a good episode, but again, given that it's not one I can personally relate to, I want to put it at B tier. And this is where they get the photocopier to make clones. And let me just point this out here. The Paper Jam Dipper is an ableist joke. It's literally a joke about how different this character is and can't speak in a way that is considered typical. That is ableism. Finally introduced to Candy and Grenda, and I will talk about Grenda in the intermission. Grenda is canonically trans, and this isn't like a Dumbledore situation either. This situation has to do with the fact that there is actual evidence in here that says she is trans within the show. So this isn't like a retcon sort of thing. She is canonically trans. She literally uses the phrase, before my voice changed. She is trans. A pin in this before the intermission. Grenda makes comments like, put me in a headlock. She's making these ultra masculine comments. And to be clear, there are masculine trans women out there. But we'll talk more about her in the intermission because I have a lot to say about Grenda. However, my sort of canon theory was that Candy was Grenda's first friend who accepted her for being trans. That's sort of a sweet element here. That doesn't save everything when it comes to Grenda, but just stay patient for the intermission. Dipper's nickname actually comes from his birthmark, which they never actually revealed Dipper's real name during the show, which Dipper is his real name, if you really think about it, because that's the name he goes by, and the name he tells other people about. That is his name, which also sort of leads to the idea that Dipper is a trans guy. So how am I going to rank this episode? And this is going to shock a bunch of people, but I'm going to put it at D tier. The reason I'm putting it at D tier is because of Grenda. We need to talk about Grenda. Pioneer Day, which celebrates Gravity Falls founding, and people can marry wood chippers, which That's not a homophobic joke in any sort of way. In this episode also is introduced Pacifica Northwest, the elite rich girl, and Pacifica doesn't like how serious Mabel is taking this, which really, just Pacifica's the worst. And the gay cops just spend their whole time going after Dipper and Mabel because they found a conspiracy. There was an 8.5 president of the United States who founded Gravity Falls but was wiped from the history, and that's secret and all that, which, yeah, it's a little weird, but what do you expect? And for some reason, the cops have clearance to know about this case. The cops do flirt with each other throughout this episode, which Disney was pretty homophobic during the production of this, but they let a whole lot slide. Plausible deniability of homosexuality. Yeah. Quentin Trubley is the 8.5 president, and he was preserved in peanut brittle, and he has a lot to say about what was going on. George Washington was a jerk. I mean, yeah, he owned slaves. And babies being on the Supreme Court, which, God, that's so true to today. Again, these episodes are pretty hit and miss when it comes to the trans stuff, but we'll talk about it when we get to it. So how do I rate this episode? C tier. This is the one with Blendin, and Waddles being introduced. The fair is going on, and Mabel wins Waddles the pig. Robbie and Wendy start to go out, which really upsets Dipper, so there's a time travel involved when Blendin comes from the future, and there's time travel shenanigans and all that. In one timeline, Pacifica gets Waddles, and Wendy doesn't go out with Robbie, which that may just be a temporary offset. And Dipper might actually be a thing in this timeline, which doesn't really line up with the reality of the rest of the show or just logic here. Even though Wendy is the female character who breaks the most amount of gender rules, it's still disappointing that a large portion of her arc is set up for the boyfriend she has. God forbid you have a queer character on this show, even asexual, or have a woman being defined by an arc that isn't romantic or interested in men. Despite its logical inconsistencies, it's still pretty fun. D tier. This is the video game episode. Dipper lectures Robbie about paying attention to Wendy. Dipper, you don't even pay attention to Wendy. Dipper, you're just as toxic as Robbie, both prone to violence. Dipper and Robbie, they're both prone to violence and feel entitled to Wendy. Which, off. The thing about the episode Dipper versus Manliness that I think shouldn't be overlooked here is that the arc of the story is about Dipper not wanting to kill something. The real message, and I think more applicable one to the real world, is that women are not objects, and that men need to understand that. And yes, they do explain that in this episode. Violence is definitely a problem. Men wanting to kill someone else isn't as common as men feeling entitled to women. Both are problems, but one is just a lot more prevalent in this society, and that could have been a different take in Dipper versus Manliness. But we need more stories, god damn it. And Robbie acting jealous of Dipper really says a lot about his character. They both have toxic masculinity they need to work on. The thing about toxic masculinity, it's not a dead-end state. You can get better at it. That's why I think a lot of men don't get. It's a criticism of your behavior, not a statement about you as a human being. You can come back from that. It's just a matter of putting in the work. And Stan makes this joke about Dipper sharing dresses or something like that with Mabel, which, if Dipper's trans, that's really transphobic. And it sort of makes the point here that testosterone makes you a killing machine, which, no. Testosterone doesn't make you a killing machine. I know, I spent a large portion of my life on testosterone, and guess what? Testosterone didn't make me want to kill other people. It made me want to myself, but that's because I'm a trans woman. And in the B-plot, Mabel finds out Stan's afraid of heights, so she gets him high heels. And he feels really weird about it, which says a lot about his masculinity, but it sort of makes sense for men of his age, but still. Dipper lied to Rumble Miss Skirmish, who came alive with the video game character. The moral of the story is women don't like fighting, so men, keep your fighting private. This message, D tier. It's a fun episode, but god, the message just misses the mark a bit. It's another Gideon episode. In the morning, a sweepstakes comes to say Stan's won a ton of money, but he knows it's a scam, and so he doesn't sign over the deed. You know, like a smart person. And Dipper getting upset about Mabel being 1 millimeter tall. We learn in this episode that Dipper is technically the older sibling. Might lead to insecurity in there, but still. If you're a twin, let me know down in the comments how you feel about this episode. Find this crystal that can make you grow and shrink. And, you know, hijinks ensue. But really, this comes down to the idea of, is Dipper a trans guy because he feels insecure? And in the end, they cause a whole bunch of damage to the Mystery Shack because, you know, no consequences for an episodic show. C tier. Dipper feels ashamed that he's going trick-or-treating with his sister, and he's peanut butter and she's jelly, which is adorable. This all goes down to Dipper's idea of masculinity, and he's also tying that to his interest in Wendy. See, a lot of this show ties masculinity and femininity to these gender roles and who you're attracted to. Your sexuality does not define your gender identity. And in this episode, Grenda's back, and they bring acknowledgement to her voice again, where Stan asks, "What's with your voice? You got a cold?" And she says, "No, my voice dropped." Because, you know, she's trans. And then there's the Summerween trickster who tells him to eat candy, and that he is candy. Interesting complex there, I guess. All in all, this was a very fun episode, and I'm going to be a little bit more lenient here, especially considering there's a little bit less transphobia in this episode. We'll get to that. A tier. Horses riding horses in the Mystery Shack, which, that's a pretty risque joke for Disney, am I right? And Dipper is dressed like a prepubescent wolf, because he's prepubescent. Funny how that works, huh? Feels demeaning to him to have to do this. And Mabel's giving away stuff at the store, which doesn't sound like a great idea for business, but she's 12. And they're overworked, plus Stan apparently doesn't know the meaning of please and thank you, which will come back to bite him in the ass later in the episode. So Mabel and Stan decide to switch places. So they make a bet. Stan thinks he'll go on a trip and make more money than she'll make his boss. And Stan goes on cash wheel for being a narcissist. That's not my joke, it's literally in the episode. But Mabel learns it's hard to be a boss, and she loses a whole bunch of money in the process. And Dipper tries to bring in the real mysteries they're actually seeing, but it goes wildly out of hand. And in the end, they only have $1. Soos has a very revealing outfit, which, okay, Disney. Stan wins a whole bunch of money on the game show, but he ends up losing because he doesn't know the word please. But that's somehow more, and so Stan has to sing "I'm Stan and I was wrong" song. A lot of queer people have used his memes. "I'm Stan and I was wrong. I'm doing Stan wrongs are." That's the most notable thing about this episode, the Stan wrong song. And then they play some Dolly Parton, which Disney has some money for that, huh? Fun episode, especially with Stan's B-plug about going on cash wheel. It's a really funny episode and really fun, so A tier. It's an anthology episode. Really, the only one I want to call attention to is the Dipper voice one, which, come on, he's a trans guy. And then there's a pinball one in Truth Teeth, which is pretty much just liar, liar, but for kids. C tier. It's the hottest day of summer, and they go to the pool for the day. There's this feud between Stan and Gideon. Wendy gets a crush on a mermaid, and Dipper works as a lifeguard with Wendy. Honestly, I got nothing to say about this episode other than stop defining female characters by their romantic interest. C tier. We got a lot to talk about with this episode. It's the body swap episode. And as a trans person, I've always been fascinated by body swap episodes, even before I knew I was trans. I wonder why. Dipper's really upset with Mabel because she's had another sleepover and it's all girly stuff that he has no interest in. Boys. Because that's all girls want. Boys. God, I can't think of anything problematic with that. Brenda's very insistent. She wants a makeover. Because guess what? She's trans. And they end up wanting to give Dipper a makeover. I don't know what Dipper's upset about. I would have been thrilled in this situation to get a makeover from a bunch of girls. But then again, I was never a boy, so. And Dipper decides to sleep outside because he can't be in the same room as these girls. And the idea of Grenda liking to break things, God, that's transphobic. Dipper's also a noisy reader, so that makes sense why Mabel's upset with him. Dipper, you're not even doing your own laundry? There's different levels of masculinity, but this is pretty toxic on its own. Wash your damn clothes, Dipper. So logically, the two of them don't want to share a room anymore, but Soos ends up finding a secret room in the process. And then there's the carpet, which ends up switching their bodies. The body swap causes absolute panic when that happens, which...
Ugh, what happened?
Dipper, why are you wearing my clothes? And my face? Am I in your body?
Am I in your body?
Get out! Get out!
That's gender dysphoria right there. And they decide to start misbehaving in each other's bodies so they get the room, which... Really? And then Soos and Waddle swap bodies, and they learn to be better people as of it. And Stan finds Mabel, who looks like Dipper, to give her the talk, telling that she didn't have this conversation beforehand. But on the other hand, Stan's not going to talk about the fact that, visibly according to him, Dipper's spying on his own sister. Stan says it's a creepy age where guys spy on girls, which... This is also an incestual case right here. At least according to Stan, it looks like Dipper is trying to watch his sister, which is a little gross. And also, given that Grenda is trans, Stan seems accepting at the very least. And Stan likes the fact that Mabel stands up to him by saying, "Shut up, old man." And Grenda being super into the romance game. And as a trans woman, we will cling to anything that makes us feel like a woman. That's just the reality of my life, at least. And they decide to give Mabel a makeover, whose member is still in Dipper's body. Waddles touches Stan in a weird way, and that somehow gives Soos a raise.
Is this some sort of negotiating tactic? Because it's not gonna work. Fine, I was lying. I'll give you a raise. Just never do that again.
Okay. And they comment how muscular Grenda is, which all goes back to transphobia. Okay, so my feelings on this episode. It's transphobic. But I remember when I watched this as a kid, it was one of the few times I felt seen. I mean, Grenda was the first trans character I ever saw in any media. I saw myself in her even though I didn't quite understand yet what that meant. And this episode sort of spoke to me on a different level. I'm really torn on this one, but I'm gonna say B tier. And again, this episode is a big one that talks about how womanhood is linked to heterosexuality, which not every girl is into boy bands. Wendy isn't even, and she's presumably straight, or at least bi, but she's not into boy bands, but she's definitely into boys. Although, isn't she into Robbie's band? Gravity Falls is a great show when talking about gender. That is if you ignore the heteronormativity, the transphobia, and how they treat women, and the absence of non-binary people. Grenda has the line, "Why wouldn't they fall in love with us?" as she's stuffing herself with food. Come on, this is transphobic. And mocking people with eating disorders, of which I am both. Sure, when I first saw this, in a lot of ways I felt seen. But really, this isn't very good. And the idea that they show here is that girls tend to mature faster than boys, but yet Grenda's really mature, is transphobic. In this show, only AMAB queerness is explored. They do not explore AFAB queerness directly. While there are characters suspected of being trans, like Dipper and, in my opinion, Robbie, I don't think it actually does a good job of talking about that. Only explores the cops and Grenda as possible queer characters. And they do these sort of like big bag wolf jokes of, "Oh, what big muscles you have," which transphobic. We're not defined by our bodies. We're defined by our experiences. I may have a unique take here, but I'm a trans woman, and I wouldn't trade this for being cis. And you might be thinking, what? Yes, I face transphobia, but I wouldn't have wanted to be necessarily born AFAB either. And that's not for reasons of like periods or stuff like that, because I don't think periods are gross, and I think it's something a lot of people go through and should be normalized and accepted. Being trans has made me a better person. It's made me more empathetic and more grateful for my own experiences. I love being trans, and I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. And the idea of the big bad wolf jokes are transphobic because they rely on the assumption that it's our bodies. It's our experiences. And Stan tells the story about how he lost a woman that he was really attracted to and then got into a bunch of acid, which, wow, Disney. And they learned that the boy bands are made in test tubes. Apparently Stan doesn't know what a CD is because he tries to put on his record player, which, what the hell, Stan? You don't know what a CD is? I know you're old, but that old? Mabel, Grenda, and Candy take the boy band and help them escape, and store them in their bedroom, which has a creepy undertone, because they're adults and they're children. And somehow, Dipper and Stan are able to play a CD on a record player, because that's how CDs work, right? And Mabel, after all this, still wants to keep the boys, even though you can't do that. You can't own another human being, at least not legally and morally. This episode shows Dipper and Mabel being possessive in completely different ways. And Wendy finally dumps Robbie, and as a child it seemed like a long time, but it was only 9 months between these episodes airing, which only accounts for 20% of the show. There was less than 1 year between these air dates. Literally 20% of the show, Wendy and Robbie are together. I just remember as a kid this felt like longer. And Dipper and Stan being unaware of Wendy's feelings sort of breaks this illusion down. Which, come on. The idea of Dipper finding a brainwashed song and then needing to tell Wendy about it so he's entitled to her? God, that's possessiveness and really negative. And they do call it out, but still, this show is very male-centered, and I think that's a problem when talking about this. If you want to have a progressive message about women, having a male-centered show isn't going to do that. At best, you're going to say, well, that came out of nowhere. Who knew what women want? They're so confusing, because that's the best you can strive for in a show like this. Oh, I'm getting so mad at this. This episode is F tier. It's the dinosaur episode. And apparently, when I rewatched this for this episode, I've forgotten this episode exists. Which, I'll explain why I think that is. And the cops are sort of portrayed as a nice couple, which Disney are making me sympathize for cops. They do this like Stranger Things sort of thing with them, where their car roof gets taken over, but they are optimistic and think of it as like a convertible. And Soos and Dipper are doing some bonding, and Soos talks about getting babes, which, talking about women like you talk about animals. We're not animals, we're human beings. Although, from my own personal experience, this is how men typically try to talk to each other when they think there isn't a woman involved. I was that woman they didn't know was involved in the conversation. And Waddles has been eating all the exhibits at the Mystery Shack. Dipper starts developing pictures of the findings he's having, and then they find a pterodactyl, or pterodactyl. And then they end up fighting a dinosaur because Stan ties up Waddles and Waddles gets taken up, which, hold on. In a later episode, Stan literally says he doesn't believe in the supernatural, which they retcon this episode. That's why I don't remember it. Given that this episode was forgettable but not bad, I'll put it in D tier. I've been critical about a bunch of these episodes so far, and you might be thinking, when's the S tier episodes coming along? Well, it's not this one either. So they watch TV and they see a new ad for Gideon's tent of telepathy, which is now replacing the Mystery Shack, because apparently they have the authority to do that. Gideon tries to steal the deed from the Mystery Shack, but that doesn't work. So Gideon says, I'm gonna go find Bill Cipher with journal number 2. And summons Bill Cipher, who's this interdimensional being who's evil and will be the main villain of the series. And Bill decides to enter Stan's mind to get the combination to a safe so that Gideon can steal the deed, which, Gideon, what's your long-term plan here? Just because you know the combination to someone's safe doesn't mean it's lawful for you to steal. That's not how the law works here. Just because you have the deed in your possession doesn't mean you own it. You stole the deed, that does not mean you're entitled to actually own the home. And Bill calls them by their symbols: shooting star, pine tree, and Mabel learns she can't attack Bill here because, well, Bill's Bill. And they go through Stan's memories as they go through his head to try to beat Bill. Bill's looking for the code, and Soos tells Dipper, hey, don't go looking at Stan's memories about you, it's not gonna go well. And Dipper finds a memory of Stan saying, I just want to get rid of him, which is literal bait and switch, where it turns out Stan actually was proud of Dipper, which, come on, pretty basic there. And I think it's interesting that with the premise of this episode, that they were very careful with it, because there are a whole lot of things that could have gone through Stan's head, because we know Stan can be a violent person and has been a criminal many times. They could have shown him breaking the law on numerous different occasions. I mean, they show him in jail, so, or, you know, anything important to his backstory, because apparently his childhood didn't show his brother. Oh, spoilers, by the way. And Bill decides to impersonate Soos. And the message of the story is that Stan was trying to toughen Dipper up this entire time, which, f*** off. And they believe in mind over matter in this episode, which, trans rights. So Gideon breaks in and gets a deed, which, again, that doesn't change the legality of this situation. It's still f*** legal. You are not, just because you have the deed in your hands, doesn't mean it's yours. I'm not even a lawyer and even I know this. Despite the problems with this episode, it's really fun and I'll just give it a whatever. This is the season 1 finale, and then after this we're gonna go into the intermission. So they've all had to move in with Soos and his abuela, because they don't have access to the shack, even though they legally are entitled to it. And Robbie's still obsessed with Wendy because, you know, toxic masculinity. And Stan feels like a failure, and that's a problem for his male ego. And Stan lies to Dipper and Mabel's parents about being in a hotel and having plenty of food, even though that isn't the case, which is really sad, but... Hold on, at no point in the show are we shown Dipper and Mabel, like, talking to their parents or even talking about their parents? Just raises a whole bunch of questions, like, do they have access to the phones? And Sue's taking a whole bunch of different jobs, like being a cook and being a bus driver, which ends up being plot relevant later in this episode. And they end up needing to leave Gravity Falls, and Gideon ends up finding journal number 3 from Dipper. So now he realizes who has journal number 1. And they realize why everyone was bound to Gideon, because there were these little tracking things with his pins, and that was causing everyone to know. But Stan picked up on it with hearing aids, and there was this giant Gideon bot, and they ended up beating the bot by hurting itself in this really epic fight. And they reveal in this episode Stan uses the basement, and he's using the machine. Now I'm really torn on this episode. It's a really good episode. But is it S-tier worthy? Yeah, it's S-tier worthy. We got our first S-tier episode. And that concludes our discussion of season 1. Now it's time for an intermission. When Gravity Falls first aired, between seasons 1 and 2, they aired Gravity Falls Shorts. Gravity Falls Shorts were a series of 5-minute segments that were played between other programs on Disney Channel to promote season 2. It's some unhinged in there. And if you want to watch me talk about that, you can sign up for my Patreon at patreon.com/SallyPrydeDrag. Plans start as low as $3 a month. Now isn't that right, Clip Art Hand? If you've made it this far into the video, please consider liking it and subscribing to this channel. Since I'm under 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube, I can't make ad money. So subscribing helps me get closer to that, and giving it a like helps it boost even further. And leaving a respectful comment down below also helps. And if you know someone who will enjoy this video, please share it with them, because I really want to grow. These videos are super expensive to make, and I want to keep making them. Now, let's talk about the trans characters in this show. Grenda. Now, Grenda was the first trans character I ever saw on television. Well, she spoke to me before I even knew what being trans was. However, looking back, there were problems with her representation. For one, she leans into the mannish stereotypes that exist for trans women. That the idea that trans women are mannish often demeans who we are as human beings. I mean, look at me. Am I mannish to you? And if you say yes, you're not being honest with yourself. Because seriously, before I transitioned, I wasn't even considered mannish. Using the transphobe's logic here, I somehow became more manly by wearing a dress. But within the realm of the show, Brenda is fully accepted as a woman and a girl. I really like that everyone in the show accepts her for who she is. It's not a question in any of their minds that she's anything other than female, because that's the way it should be. Accept trans people for who they are. Now let's talk about Dipper. Now, I don't want to upset the trans masks out there, but Dipper isn't trans canonically. In fact, he's cis canonically. You see, in a later episode where Dipper has a brain scan, there's a bit in there about whether he should cross his legs when around Wendy. I think it's a really gross joke to have about a child in there, but it does technically disqualify Dipper as trans. However, I don't want to invalidate the experiences of the trans viewers here. You are valid for having that connection. Trust me, I've had connections with many female characters before. I don't want to invalidate that for you. However, I think Robbie is more likely to be trans. He wears a dysphoria hoodie all the time. Well, he's always gone by Robbie. His family, his middle name is Stacy, which is considered a female name nowadays. So I think that Robbie was likely supported by his family from an early age, and that he's even started T. That's my guess. That's right, we're going to the zombie episode. End of the last season, Dipper and Mabel finally came clean to Stan about the adventures they've been having and about the journals. And Stan claims it's a bunch of ends up actually having the other two journals, and he uses them to use a portal thing, which we'll talk about later here. So there are investigators from the government coming over, and when they come to ask, Dipper says, I want to talk to you about this, and they give him his card, but his uncle confiscates it, and there was also a party going on, which ends up getting zombies because Dipper wanted to reveal the truth to them, and ended up releasing zombies in the process. Real smart move there, Dipper. So Dipper accidentally releases a bunch of zombies, but they're able to take care of that through karaoke. And Stan finally admits that he knows the paranormal's going on even though he denied it. Here's the thing. We already knew Stan knew about that, and do you know how we know? The f***ing pterodactyl episode. He literally punched a pterodactyl, and somehow everyone just forgot about it. Although maybe the Society of the Blind Eye got to them. And Dipper's masculinity is questioned by singing this pop song.
Friday night, we're gonna party till dawn. Don't worry, Daddy, I've got my favorite dress on. Mabel, this is stupid!
And that writes Dipper really uncomfortable and questions if his life's even worth it. I know I've already said Dipper can't be trans canonically, but he's trans. And the investigators turn out to be fine in the end, but they just get more interested about the case. So where does this episode go on the ranking? I'm gonna say B tier, simply because of the issue with Stan not remembering things. Dipper's over at Wendy's place, and they're watching a horror movie together, and he has a lot of anxiety about his feelings for her. However, instead of asking her out or talking about his feelings, he invites her on to go on an adventure with Mabel and Soos, which is a great fun thing to do. Anyone finds it a little strange that Soos is just wandering around with a bunch of teenagers? No questions there, right? I know to us it seems like Soos is a great guy, but to an onlooker this may not look completely positive, especially considering what he's worn around them in the past. Yikes. Given the damage of the last episode with the zombie, Stan bribes a repair person to get this under the way without any pay, and everyone agrees to keep this a secret. They keep it a secret and people look the other way. In fact, a lot of people will actively try to prevent you from seeing it, like the Society of the Blind Eye that we'll talk about in a later episode. So they go down into this bunker and they see a whole bunch of stuff down there, and it's a little confusing for them. And Mabel makes this reference to Dipper's internet history. Holy crap, Mabel. Holy you don't know what someone's internet history could say about them. I mean, when I was a teenager, I had some stuff I didn't want other people to see. No, it wasn't. It was what gender am I test, and a whole bunch of stuff about being trans. Because, you know, I'm trans and was trying to figure that out as a teenager. This isn't a phase. And Mabel decides to lock up Dipper and Wendy together until Dipper tells her the truth. Which, Mabel, this is pretty up. Like, imagine a queer person in this situation being forced to express their feelings. This is pretty up. Let Dipper be on his own. Yeah, I know he's got stuff to deal with, but just let him deal with it. So then a shapeshifter appears, posing as the author, but it turns out it's just a guy on a food can. And there's this freezing machine there. The shapeshifter says the real author of the journals hasn't been himself. Wonder what that could mean. And the shapeshifter gets Dipper and Mabel corner. He said,
"Can I be one or the other? How about both?"
You know, it's a shapeshifter's dilemma, but also the gender fluid dilemma. And then Dipper has this really awkward moment where he thinks Wendy died, and he's trying to confess his feelings for her, but that was actually a shapeshifter. So then there's this awkward moment, but Wendy ends up saving it because she's awesome. And Soos also finds this laptop there, and he says, maybe I can fix it. And that's the end of the episode. Really good episode. I'm putting it A tier. Not a perfect episode, but it's definitely a solid one. Wait, what the a golf war? Named an episode after a real war? What the This episode revolves around mini golf. It's a nice, lighthearted episode. Yeah, except for when Big Henry dies, who's one of the little pudgeons who controls the balls. Because, you know, the golf course isn't actually, like, just doing physics or anything. It's actually little people controlling everything. And they try to, like, make Mabel win instead of Pacifica. It's a lighthearted episode. Nothing really to talk about. Basically, in the end, Pacifica and Mabel learn to get along somewhat okay. Teamwork. Oh, and Mabel eats a sticker. C tier. And this episode, Soos ends up getting the laptop fixed and gives it to Dip. And well, they need to crack password, and they're trying to guess different things, and they use a dictionary to try to go through all this, but here's the thing. Passwords don't have to be words, Dipper. They can be random strings of letters and numbers. And Mabel develops a crush on a puppeteer, which, how old is this guy? Is he like Wendy's age or something? Seems a little weird in the age difference there. And there's this interesting idea going on with the compet, like, and I know a lot of lesbians have talked about Mabel potentially being a compulsory heterosexual, but here's the thing. I don't really see that. Mabel seems to have legitimate interest in this guy. I think it's just a result of men writing women poorly. As shown repeatedly throughout the run of this show, the writers understand men a lot more than they understand women. They don't seem comfortable writing stories about women as much. And it sort of shows that they talk a lot about in the show what it means to be a man, but they don't really talk about what it means to be a woman. And those are very different struggles. And I think it's important to discuss that in this episode. And I think it would have been great if they had discussed that at some point in this episode. But when you have a primarily male writing staff, that can be a little tricky. So Mabel wants to start a puppet show to get this guy interested in her. And it becomes super elaborate. But meanwhile, Dipper's still trying to work on this computer. And Dipper, you can put the computer away for like a day or two. It's not going anywhere. And he's constantly staying up day and night trying to crack the code here. And he isn't able to do it. And then Bill tries to make him an offer, which isn't gonna work. Yikes. And Bill makes an offer of, give me a puppet and I'll give you the password. Fine, I'll accept that, begrudgingly. Which he shouldn't have done because he thought it was just a regular puppet. But no, he was the puppet. Here's the thing though. Bill broke the promise. Sure, even if you say that Dipper is a puppet, I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying is that he broke the promise because immediately after making this deal, he smashed the laptop. He broke his promise. That handshake meant nothing. Although, for Bill, I don't think he gives a for as much as I've complained about how boy crazy Mabel is, I prefer episodes where she is boy crazy over the fact of when she's being harsh to Dip. Just that, like, I think that she looks better as a character when that happens. And the line, everyone likes puppets, that's from RuPaul's Drag Race, which is really deep for this Disney show. And Mabel decides to use the journal as a prop, so Bill wants it, because that makes sense. Disney apparently made a rule for this show, that whenever characters got in a vehicle, they had to announce they were putting their seatbelt on, you know, for child safety, but they couldn't show any gay characters because that would be dangerous to children. There are a lot of things in the show, like gnome, that don't really exist in our real world. One of those being that everyone is heterosexual. It just doesn't exist within reality. There are people who are just, I don't know, queer. And Mabel's play is very gender stereotypical. Men going off to war and stuff like that. And the guy she had a crush on, Gabe, turns her down because he didn't like the quality of her shift. Gabe, and they end up getting Bill out of Dipper's body by tickling him because, you know, Disney. And they do a Muppet Show parody at the end, which is really cool. How do I rank this episode? D tier. This is the one where Giffany, or Jiffity. It starts off with Mabel getting her braces on a screen door, and as a girl who had braces growing up, yeah, I can feel that. And Soos helps her get untangled, which Soos seems pretty awesome. Soos lives with his grandmother, and his grandmother's like, you should start making girls. After all, your cousin Reggie is getting married, which, you know, heterosexuality, yay. And also, apparently, Soos's grandfather's in hell. I'm not even joking about that. And Stan has this old attraction called Old Goldie. Apparently spills oil and everyone wants him to get rid of it. So then they all go to the mall. Stan gets encapsulated by this pizza animatronic. Soos ends up getting a video game that people keep returning for some reason. This hyper-realistic video game apparently killed the programmers. And also, this character, Jiffity, is very possessive and can travel between computers. Which, what the f***? It's scary as hell, and she ends up taking over the animatronics on the date that Soos ends up having with a real woman. And I love the sort of storyline there. And in the end, Melanie and Soos decide to have a long-distance relationship. It's honestly a very sweet episode, and people are gonna hate me for this, but I'm putting it S tier. It's a fun episode, and it treats women like real people. Who would have thought a woman would like that? Gift Shop of Horrors. It's an anthology, and it's my favorite anthology of the series. Anthology of tales to sell you merchandise. So Stan loses his hands after stealing a watch from a witch. So Stan ends up losing his hands after stealing a watch from a witch. He misses all the signs that this is cursed, and he wants to give the witch a gesture. And in the end, they help redecorate, and he gets his hands back. Whatever. And then there's the pig episode with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Interesting little story. Nothing much to say. Playdate, another sort of funny one where Mabel's afraid of stop motion animation, and then they turned out the claymation is real. Fun story. And then in the end, the person who showed up at the Mystery Shack at the beginning poisoned and becomes a prisoner. Guess what that means? Stan owns slaves. That's right, Stan owns slaves. This is disgusting. B tier. In this episode, we learn why all these people don't know the mysteries around Gravity Falls, because there's an organization that wipes people's minds, much like how people want to hide that queerness exists. But that doesn't stop queerness from existing. See, these people don't want people to know that there's queer stuff going on in Gravity Falls. Even though it doesn't stop queer stuff from happening. And Dipper thinks Old Man McGucket wrote the journals. And then there's this song about blanching, and Wendy doesn't know what blanching is. It's something to do with vegetables, but I don't really know. Lazy Susan comes in, and after seeing the gnomes, she gets her memory erased.
Lazy Susan, how do you feel?
I feel great! I can't even remember what was wrong, or what I'm doing here, or if I'm a man or a woman.
Oh, you'll...
That's it. Lazy Susan is trans. She's trans. Gender is taught. Gender is taught through society, and when you erase someone's mind, you erase that. Although, then Soos says something really problematic that he doesn't like her mascara, which, holy Soos, she's doing the best she can. And Wendy convinces Mabel not to erase her summer romances, which, good on her. She's talking about healing and stuff like that, which is a universal experience, not a womanly experience, even though the show likes to depict romance as something exclusive to women. But you can't show a lesbian. And they all make confessions to each other because they think they're gonna die. But here's the thing, Wendy's totally stretched, which no teenagers are rest, especially with her family life. Makes sense, and why she'd be so laid back. She's trying to project a layer of coolness. And McGucket ends up saving the day because his memory's been erased so much it doesn't even matter. McGucket gets his memory back in the end by just stop using the memory wipe, which I guess sort of predicts the finale, but I have many thoughts about the finale. They erased the mind of one of the guys in the Society for the Blind and he forgets who he is. Does he have a family, social security number? What the hell is gonna happen? I'm putting it A tier, especially for that chilling ending with McGucket. This is the Blendin, whatever that fucking guy's name is. He's about to be charged for the crimes he committed in the last episode because, you know, he was careless with a time machine. And then, like, he challenges Dipper and Mabel to a competition in the future, where that sounds perfectly sane, to challenge two children to a deadly competition. And in the process, they learn Soos is unhappy on his birthday because, well, his father abandoned him. Really sad. And when they go back in time, Wendy as a kid likes Dipper, which Mabel likes to make this point, like, now you know how she feels. That's not the point, Mabel. The age difference is much shorter. Like, there's an 8-year age gap when Dipper goes back in time, whereas it's like a 3-year age difference in the present, or I guess the past from now. And in the end, Soos realizes that his father was a bad guy because he didn't even want to show up. And he ends up using the time wish that they want, the infinite pizza, which is a good wish. I'm gonna say B tier. Fuck, love God episode. Rafi's literally wallowing in a grave over Wendy. God, this storyline. And Mabel's wearing an adorable rainbow sweater. If only this episode wasn't infamous for silencing gay voices. There was supposed to be a gay kiss in this episode, but Disney censored that. Disney, f you and your homophobia. Robbie is a hopeless incel. And there's a guy named the Love God who forces people to fall in love. This episode has sex jokes.
Only if you sign mine, baby. Let's get weird.
And drug jokes, and jokes about kids being eaten with the, like, horrifying balloon. And you can't have a gay kiss in this episode. Disney, your priorities are pretty up. And Mabel decides to match up Robbie and Tambry despite everyone saying this is a bad idea. Love potions are pretty risky anyway, so it's like, what the f? And the Love God's pretty emotionally abusive by showing everyone's past loves and torturing them. F you, Love God. Disney. Okay, I have a feeling you all know where this episode's going, but it's F tier. It's the Northwest House Party episode. The Northwest Mansion is being haunted because they won't let parties in, and the people who build it were promised a party at least once a year, and they die in the process, which is disturbing for a Disney show, but eerily accurate to reality. Millionaires and billionaires get wherever the f they want, while everyone else sits in the brain. Now really, there's not much to say with this episode other than the fact that Brenda actually succeeds with a guy, whereas Mabel and Candy don't, because they overcomplicate their plan. Where have I seen that idea before? Oh yeah, they did that in a previous episode. Even though I think the problem here is that they're defining womanhood through the heterosexual experience, Brenda has some success, which is uncommon and not often depicted for trans people on TV shows and movies. Brenda is seen as a very attractive girl, and because she is a girl, and she's desirable by the boys around her because, well, she's a girl. Oh yeah, and then McGucket, who's gaining his memories back, figures out there's an apocalypse coming soon, in less than 24 hours, and that the government's on it, and they're hiding in plain sight, in part due to cross-dressing. So yeah, honestly, this episode's kind of mid, so C tier. Stan's working on the portal that goes haywire, and Stan is struggling to tell Dipper and Mabel about what's going on, but he knows he wants to tell them, but he's arrested and detained. Shaq gets swatted, and Wendy says, "F it, I'm not going to work today." And the government agents decide to put them in foster care, which, hold on, shouldn't they go back to their family in California? And Stan asks Soos to guard the vending machine with his life. Turns out Stan was actually stealing nuclear waste, which, what the f? So this sort of brings up an interesting question, which was, if Stan's been working on this for like 30 years, why the hell did he invite Dipper and Mabel out there? I mean, think about it this way. He didn't want to harm them. That's made abundantly clear. So why would he bring them down? And I know that, like, he needed the other journals and he didn't have them, so he probably thought it was okay, but still? Yikes. Inviting them to a home with nuclear stuff on there? Holy holy and they end up finding Stan's vending machine code. And Dipper feels betrayed, for good reason, that Stan seems to have all 3 journals there and lied about it. I mean, I would too. And I mean, the first time I watched this episode, I was like, how the hell did I trust Stan? And Stan ends up escaping from custody. So Stan ends up going down to the bunker, and the timer's about to go off for the end of the world. And everyone's like, I don't trust him anymore. Like, even Soos, who sees Stan as a father figure, says, my job now is to protect these kids. Holy and it all comes down to Mabel. Does she press the button or not? She decides not to press the button and trust her Uncle Stan. And when I watched this, I thought the world was ending. At least within Gravity Falls. Stan's brother comes through the portal. Stanford Pines. The Stan that we know is actually Stan Lee Pines, and they switched identity. Or at least, more accurately, he took his identity. Honestly, this episode was epic, and when it aired, it was my favorite episode, and frankly, I think it still kind of is. So, where else but S tier? Is basically the follow-up to the previous episode, where it's the backstory of Stanley and Stanford, where they grew up close, and then as they got older, they got a little separated. And this happened for a few reasons. For one, Stanford was on track to go to an elite college, whereas Stanley was just lucky to graduate high school. But feeling upset about this, Stanley decided to go and sabotage the project accidentally for the science fair, and that cost admission. Stan Lee ended up drifting from place to place, going scam to scam, and basically being broke the entire time. Whereas Stanford went to back up some more, and he met McGucket. And McGucket gave up his job in computers to help study Gravity Falls because he also was interested in anomalies. Given that Stanford had 6 fingers, he thought it would be a good idea to study anomalies. And that's what happens to a lot of queer people in academia. A lot of queer people in academia study gender studies, and the reason for that is because it's a reflection of who we are and we're interested in that subject. I make these videos because I'm queer and I'm interested in queer stuff and want to get my perspective out there. And it's the same sort of thing going on with Stanford, that he went to Gravity Falls because there was a lot of anomalies there, and he saw himself as an anomaly and thought he could get a purpose out. And in the end, all the issues are sort of brushed off. All the government agents there got their minds erased and got to turn off over all the files they had. And then Soos tries to talk to Wendy at 3 o'clock in the morning, which, what the f, dude? You're a grown adult, and that's a teenager. What the f? And Ford's ego won't allow him to burn the journals he made, even though that would have saved things in the end. The remaining bits of Gravity Falls deal with male ego, and I think it's important to have these discussions about male gender, but the problem is, you don't give the same nuanced conversations to the female characters. I'm gonna give this episode an A. It's a pretty heartfelt story, but still doesn't rack up to the previous episode. Season 2, Episode 13, Dungeons, Dragons, and More Dragons. Now, I'm a big fan of D&D, and I play it a lot, so I enjoyed this episode. But honestly, there's not much to talk about other than Weird Al was really cool in it. This episode gets a A tier for me. Next episode. Gravity Falls mayor has died, and Stan decides, I'm gonna run for mayor. This is pretty much the Trump story in a nutshell. We got a criminal running for public office, and somehow getting a lot of votes. However, in this case, he was also disqualified because of his crimes, which that's not legal, because, you know, America. Yeah. So Gideon's father also tries to run, which is very obviously a way to try to pardon Gideon. Tries to bribe people with 50% discount on cars, which 50% off on cars? That's a pretty good deal. And Stan's just not very good at running for mayor. He's unpopular, but he puts on a tie and it makes him receptive to the ideas of Dipper and Mabel, who are actually supportive. And Ford's busy doing something unimportant this episode. And they drop some lore here, which is Ford supported Reagan. What the Ford? And Ford also just gives out ties and he's like, yeah, just use it responsibly. What the fuck? And Stan even has the line, I could debate naked and still win. That's pretty much what Trump said. I could shoot someone in the middle of 5th Avenue and not lose any voters. In this episode, I'm giving it C tier. Not that memorable. Ford has a dream that Bill's coming, so they're gonna have to Bill-proof the shack. So Mabel and the rest of the girls go on a unicorn expedition to get some unicorn hair to help protect the shack. The unicorns keep telling Mabel, you're a bad person, and doing good deeds to look like a good person doesn't make you a good person, which is basically the good place argument there, but nonetheless. But one of the things I really like is that Glenda is treated like a girl and it's not up for debate. But it turns out these pure of heart scams of the unicorns were just that, scams. So they ended up beating up all the unicorns to get their hair to protect the shack. They say only a girl pure of heart can do it, and so Glenda is also eligible because she's a girl pure of heart. So don't debate in the comment but whether she is good of heart. And then they do a drug deal. They allow that on Disney, but they don't allow gay kisses. F you, Disney. And Ford also tries to train Dipper as to not be tricked by Bill and not let him in your head. And then the truth comes out that Ford actually made a deal with Bill back in the day, which, yeah, no. And that's why he has a metal plate in his head. And there's even chloroform in this episode, because chloroform's okay, just not gay people. I'm giving this episode a B, because you're including Glenda on the girls' trip, but other than that, it's not really that memorable of an episode. So what are they going to do in the next episode after they just finished Bill-proofing the house? That's right, they're going to go on a road trip and prank all the other tourist traps, because that makes sense. You just Bill-proof the house. I think they aired this out of order, because Ford's not even in this episode. And Dipper's still upset about Wendy, which, okay, I thought we already dealt with this arc, but whatever. I think they put this out of order, but I don't know. Oh, and of course, Candy has to have a crush on Dipper, because no female in this story can have a non-heterosexual arc. D tier. Dipper learning his path in life, that he is offered an apprenticeship with Ford, and he decides to take it. Whereas Mabel is disappointed that she's going to lose her friends after they have realized that the summer's almost over and they're planning their birthday party and not most of them can attend. Mabel's pissed and betrayed that Dipper and her are going to be separated because he wants to take the apprenticeship with Ford, which honestly, Ford, you should be offering that to Mabel too. I mean, think about how much she's helped Dipper along the way. But no, that's unrealistic. And in the end, Bill ends up taking over Blandin's body. Blendin tricks Mabel into giving over the space-time or whatever it's called. An anomaly is formed and Bill and his creatures come in introducing Weirdmageddon. So where do I rank this episode? I'm gonna say A tier. Really good character development storyline there. And for once, a storyline about a woman that isn't about heterosexuality. So Bill and his buddies have come to Gravity Falls. Ford tries to take a shot at Bill, but it doesn't work, and he misses. Holy and he gets frozen over. And we get to see, obviously, more of Wendy being a because yeah, and we now have Bodacious T, and no one wants to respect their name. F you if you don't respect their name. They're Bodacious T. Anything else is their dead name. Then Time Baby from the other time travel episodes comes over this timeline but is killed by Bill. Which, holy I don't know what that does for the timeline. And they do a South Park joke in a children's show.
Oh no, a tantrum. Whatever will I do about that? How about this?
And Gideon ends up breaking out of prison and has a chain with the key with the starship on it because Mabel's been captured. And Wendy and Dipper are able to convince him, you know, not being a toxic and feeling entitled to women. Travel through all these bubble fields which send them into different dimensions, but then they get to the one designed for Mabel, and well, that brings us to the next episode. Okay, I'm sorry, this episode's S tier. Weirdmageddon's just a awesome storyline. Alright, so now it's the penultimate episode, and they go into Mabel's reality, and they all have these elaborate fantasies. Part of me really wants to know what Grenda's fantasy was, but well, guess we'll never know. And then there are these men in there that also were in Stan's fantasy a while back, that Mabel has some attraction to, interesting enough, and then they become real in the end. And Dipper announces he's not taking Ford's apprenticeship and he's sticking with Mabel in the long run, which, alright, wonder how long that would last. To be honest, I think Gravity Falls is one of those shows that I think could really have an interesting reboot. I know SAG-AFTRA and WGA are on strike, but after the strike, this would be an interesting idea to have there. What would happen after the summer? Because think about it this way. We also learned that Ford isn't going to be dead for at least another 10 years at this point from the present. And Stan's probably still alive, the two of them together. Maybe there's some anomaly around the world they're looking into and they need help from Dipper and Mabel. Who knows? Maybe Dipper and Mabel had a falling out as they got older. I don't know. This is one of those things that a lot of stuff had changed over this time. And they could even pull like an iCarly reboot sort of situation. Now that they're older, Dipper and Wendy could even be a couple, which I know is an unpopular opinion. And frankly, I didn't see much interest in it, but it could be something there. Or maybe Wendy could be or gay. Cool stuff going on there. And, you know, the cops could be married because it got legalized after Gravity Falls. And in the end, they end up back at the end of the shack. And this was a decent episode, but sort of filler in my opinion for the next episode. So I'm gonna put this one at A tier. It could have been great, but it was sort of filler for the finale. So it's the finale. And if you haven't subscribed at this point, please do so. I've given you at least an hour of content. Please at least like and subscribe. It really helps get this channel going. I've entertained you for a while, so please. Pacifica's wearing a sack because she doesn't want to wear one of Mabel's sweaters, but she ends up being obligated to do so, and turns out she's the llama in the wheel. And then they all try to stand in a circle after rescuing Ford and standing in a circle to try to defeat Bill. But Stan's like, I don't want any part of this because Ford refused to say thank you. And then Ford does, but their egos are getting in the way. And strange enough, it's the male ego that hurts them and saves them in the end. Because Stan feels worthless, and he tries to resolve it in the end by switching clothes with Ford and then having his entire mind erased with Bill inside. What I don't understand is why they didn't put Bill Cipher on the forget wheel. Wouldn't that just take care of Bill? Why do you need to erase Stan's memories altogether? To be honest, I'm still pretty pissed off at this ending because, yeah, they tried to go for this heartfelt moment, but my god, they fucked it up. They tried to be heartfelt, but the problem was this ending makes no sense. Stan's memory coming back was a problem. You should have stayed with the hard ending there. Should have been sad. And well, that's life, and they should have done better about that. And I know there are people who will try to explain this, but for sake, it doesn't work. And they try to have a happy ending, and then where Dipper and Wendy switch hats, which is a really sweet moment, and they get back on the bus to leave, and it's their birthday. It's such a sad ending. Stan and Ford decide to go on a trip that they always plan to, and Soos gets to run the mystery shack, and his Operlita gets to move in right away. And then it comes down to Waddles. What happens to Waddles? Well, Waddles goes to California with them because Ford and Stan are both armed, and the bus driver doesn't want to deal with that. Just to think, what the hell happens when they go to California? Do you really think their parents are going to let them keep the pig? What the f? They're just pushing the problem down the road. A tier. So that was my look into Gravity Falls, and here are my final thoughts here. I think when it comes to Gravity Falls and trans representation, for the time it came out, I think it was decent. And I think it's important when they discussed trans themes here and gender roles as a whole. I think they failed in some big places, most notably with the representation of women. And I think that reflects poorly on Grenda as well, given that she is a woman. But she does fit a lot of the stereotypes of women, but unfortunately still fits into the awful stereotypes of trans women. But then again, she was the first bit of trans representation I ever saw. But thinking about where I was at the time, she was a comfort I did not have, knowing that I was trans and not having the words for it. Sometimes representation can be beneficial even if you don't have perfect representation. And that's a very nuanced conversation to have here. If they were to ever reboot this show, I really like them to explore these themes a lot more, especially with women. What does it mean to be a woman in today's society? And no, I'm not talking about that transphobic stuff. I'm talking about the societal gender roles. What does it mean to be a woman? They dealt with a lot of what does it mean to be a man in today's society. Do the same for what it means to be a woman. If you enjoyed this video, please give a like, subscribe, and I'm on Patreon as well at patreon.com/SallyPrydeDrag. Plan starts as low as $3 a month. You can watch an extended, uncensored cut of this video, including the part where I talk about Gravity Falls shorts. And you can even see my comedy special, Pride and Joy, a Trans Story, where I talk about my journey being trans. Yes, the account is 18+. That's because some of the material I talk about there, comedy-wise, is sexually explicit. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.